Okay, can you see that, Al?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, I'm just got my phone.
Oh, okay. Can you read it on your phone or?
Yeah, I could read it on my phone. I got it.
All right. Let's see here. Okay, we're on 31. This is an interesting verse because remember you were saying how Prabhupada could see Krishna?
Yeah,
Everybody
yeah,
could see
yeah.
Krishna, but it's just, some people can't, the sun is like Krishna's eye, and, everybody sees the sun and he's a taste of water. But, it takes some special, a devotee that his eyes are smeared with a salve of love, and Krishna can reveal himself in person. That happens. But and anyone can have that vision, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to realize Krishna. But this is a verse that talks about like what people are seeing in illusion. This text, you might be interested in this, Brian, because it talks about being in the cave, I think.
Yeah, awesome.
Text 31, Yata Nabhasi Meghago Renur Va Prativo Nile, Evam Drastaridris Yatvam Aropitam Abudibi. Synonyms, Yata, as it is, Nabhasi, in the sky, Mega Oga, the mass of clouds, Renu, dust, Va, as well as Partiva, muddiness, Anile, in the air, Evam, thus, Distari, to the seer, Disyatvam, for the purpose of seeing, Aropitam is implied Abudibi, by the less intelligent people. Okay, so translation. Clouds and dust are carried by the air, but less intelligent persons say that the sky is cloudy and the air is dirty, only if they live in LA or maybe in Pittsburgh in the 70s.
Maybe Pittsburgh, yeah.
Similarly, they also, like along the Mon where Al lives in McKeesport.
Oh, yeah.
My father used to work in a steel mill.
Oh, mine too.
Really? Yeah, everybody used to work in a steel mill.
Yeah, Shenango.
Steel mills are closed now, except for one or two. Yep. Similarly, they also implant material bodily conceptions on the spirit self. So that's the analogy.
Okay.
Let me see if I can get both of you on here. All right. So go ahead, Al.
The purport is further confirmed here within our material eyes and senses, we cannot see the Lord, who is all spirit. We cannot even detect the spiritual spark which exists within the material body of the living being. We look towards the outward covering of the body or subtle mind of the living being, but we cannot see the spiritual spark within the body. So we have to accept the living being's presence by the presence of his gross body. Similarly, those who want to see the Lord with their present material eyes or with the material senses are advised to meditate on the gigantic external feature called the Virat Rupa.
That's a universal form of the universe.
Yeah, the universal form. That's what they know. That's the universal form. For instance, when a particular gentleman goes in his car, which can be seen very easily, we identify the car with the man with the car. When the president goes out on his particular car, we see that there is the president. For the time being, we identify the car with the president. Similarly, less intelligent men who want to see God immediately without necessary qualifications are shown first the gigantic material cosmos as the form of the Lord. Although the Lord is within and without, the clouds and the clouds in the sky and the blue of the sky are better appreciated in the connection. Although the bluish tint of the sky and the sky itself are different, we conceive of the color of the sky as blue, but that is in general conception of the layman only.
Yeah, so that just made me realize what he's talking about here. You know, like when you see a car, you know, like you see, you know, like Air Force One, or you know, you see the beast. I think they call it. The president drives a beast. It's like a big, you know, bulletproof car. You say, oh, there goes the president. You know, so you identify the machine that he's riding in with that particular person. And I remember one time there was a Rath Yatra parade where you have a parade with Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra, the forms of the Lord. They go out of the temple. And this has been going on for thousands of years in India. And every year they have Rath Yatra in Jagannath Puri, and 1 million people plus, you know, sometimes more than 1 million, line the streets, and they all gather to see Lord Jagannath and his cart. And so he goes out to see the people. Usually the people have to see him, but you know, that's his cart, you know. So one time they, you know, Prabhupada introduced that here in America. You know, he first brought it to San Francisco because his disciples had started a center there. And so the first basic one was in San Francisco. And before the pandemic, you know, I was just reading about that history. This is in 1967, you know, so it's almost 50 years ago that they had the first Rath Yatra in the United States. And I was reading about it. I got inspired. I wanted to get one here in Pittsburgh because Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra, they were actually here. You know, the ones now in New Vrindavan, the big deities.
Yeah, I went to that one.
Yeah, they're in the temple, but they were here in Pittsburgh in the 80s. I was at the preaching center there on Negley Avenue over in what is that? It's out Penn Avenue. It's near the Highland Park Bridge down that way. But they were in Shenley, kind of like past, you know, Penn Avenue. You make a left on Negley. And we rented a big house there, and we used to go out and chant Hare Kṛṣṇa on the streets down Forbes Avenue to all the college students, you know.
Oh, nice.
It didn't last long because I'm kind of a pussy, you know. And it was winter, and all of a sudden these college students, they were just like taunting us, you know, you insects, you know. And I was like playing my little hand cymbals, cartels, and all of a sudden, boom, a snowball hits me right in the chest.
Oh,
I was out of there. I went back to the farm. He said, why don't you want to, you know, be in the preaching center there? He says, well, yeah, I just want the Association of Devotees. And the temple president asked me, and I said, well, I said, you know, I want to be the Association of Devotees. I just don't want to be in that preaching center anymore. He said, what do you mean association? You want to take a shower with them or something? But, you know, anyway, I didn't last very long. You know, I wasn't that determined back then. All I knew back then was Lord Jagannath, he had this wonderful servant. Her name was Haladini Devi Dasi. She's actually a saint. And she was living in the Pittsburgh temple in the 80s, taking care of Jagannath. And she was taking care of Jagannath in the old days too, pre-New Vrindavan, you know, the expansion. She lived in a little farmhouse with Jagannath. And she would make him all kinds of delectable treats. I mean, she was really dedicated. And all I knew when I was living in that temple was at a certain point of time, I knew when it would come off the altar, she would make these cinnamon buns. I didn't know anything about Kṛṣṇa, but I knew the Mother Hladini's cinnamon buns would be coming off the altar, and I was just like waiting for that. You know, that was my goal of life, is to get those cinnamon buns because they were so good. Oh my God.
nice.
Anyway, long story short, she was a saint, and she went to Africa in the 90s, and she was in a foreign country. There's a book written about her, and she was in a kind of a war-torn area, and some rebels, and there was kind of like a civil war going on in that country, and they were trying to make friends with both governments, give them food, you know, try to make nice. But then they started harassing the devotees, and you know, one devotee said, you know, don't, you know, it started like mouthing off to him, you don't do that. So they lined him up all against the river, and and she wanted to protect him because they could have gotten killed. You know, they're like, and she said, "How dare you do this to devotee?" And they shot her.
Wow.
She's dead. And this happened in the 90s, but
Wow.
she gave her life, you know, trying to defend the devotees from these demoniac warlords, you know.
Wow, man.
Yeah, that's a pretty intense story, you know.
That is,
But
yeah.
that's like what's going on in the world right now, you know. It's going
You
on.
ain't kidding there.
That was in the Lord Chaitanya, where us people, apparently there's non-devotees and then there's devotees, apparently demoniac and devotees. So that's, I guess that's what we're going through now.
Haridas Thakur, your hero,
Mhm.
he was caned, you know, the Qazi, the Muslim magistrate back then, 500 years ago. He couldn't handle him. He was very jealous, and he couldn't handle him chanting Hare Krishna, his popularity. And so he said, you know, you're a Muslim. He was actually born a Muslim, but he started chanting Hare Krishna. He said, why are you doing that? You have to stop. Otherwise I'm, you know, have you beaten. And he said, I can't stop, you know, it's because he was dedicated, you know. And so he had his servants cane him in 22 marketplaces.
Phew.
And he kept on chanting. And then they were in anxiety because he wouldn't die.
Wow.
And so Haridas, he said, okay, if that's a problem, he just feigned death. You know, he could actually suspend his breath and everything. So they thought he was dead and they threw him in the river. But then, you know, it turns out Lord Chaitanya was protecting him the whole time. He showed his back to Haridas after that incident, and his back was lined with stripes from the whip. So Lord Chaitanya himself was taking the punishment of that devotee. He was one of the greatest devotees of Lord Chaitanya. He was born a Muslim, and he was known. Even though he was born as a Muslim, Lord Chaitanya's movement was so all-inclusive that he made him the Acharya of the holy name, the guru of the holy name, because he said a lot of people behave nicely and a lot of people, you know, preach nicely, but you do both on the basis of the Hare Krishna mantra. So you are the incarnation you are the embodiment of the holy name, you know. And so he made him the Acharya, or the guru by example, of preaching Krishna consciousness on the basis of the holy name. And so that's what he elevated to him too, you know. So, but he got in a lot of trouble. I mean, you know, a lot of people get in trouble, you know, especially when they're devotees. They, you know, there's demoniac forces, and they don't like, you know, people saying there's somebody else besides you that are God. You know, everybody's really jealous in the material world, and so, you know, that's what happens. You know, like a lot of good people were, you know, like Jesus Christ, for example, he was crucified.
Yeah.
But it happens again and again and again, you know. Anyway, let's go on here. I don't want to waste too much time babbling. So text 32. Ataparam yad avyaktam avyuda guna brimhitam adrishta shrutta vastutvat sajivo yat punarbhava. Synonyms: ata, this; param, beyond; yat, which; avyaktam, unmanifest; avyuda, without formal shape; guna, brimhitam, affected by the qualities; adrishta, unseen; ashruta, unheard; vastutvat, being like that; sa, that; jiva, the living being; yat, that which; punabhava, takes birth repeatedly. Translation: beyond this gross conception of form is another subtle conception of form, which is without formal shape and is unseen, unheard, and unmanifest. The living being has his form beyond this subtlety, otherwise he could not have repeated births. Go ahead, Al, read the first paragraph.
The purport is as the gross cosmic manifestation is conceived as the gigantic body of the Lord, so also there is the conception of his subtle form, which is simply realized without being seen, heard, or manifested. But in fact, all these grosser subtle conceptions of the body are in relation with the living beings. The living beings has his spiritual form beyond the gross, material, subtle, psychic existence. The gross body and psychic functions cease to act as soon as the living being leaves the visible gross body. In fact, we say that the living being has gone away because he is unseen and unheard, even when the gross body is not acting, when the living being is in sound sleep. We know that he is in within the body by his breathing. So the living beings passing away from the body does not mean that there is no existence of the living soul. It is there otherwise. How can we repeat his birth again and again?
The conclusion is that the Lord is eternally existent in his transcendental form, which is neither gross nor subtle, like that of the living being. His body is never to be compared to the gross and subtle bodies of the living being. All such conceptions of God's body are imaginary. The living being has his eternal spiritual form, which is conditioned only by his material contamination. You know, people don't understand what Krishna's form is, but he has his form. I was going to tell you a story about that Jagannath parade. They had one Jagannath parade, and devotees were driving Jagannath to the cart. You know, they have a big cart and it's on wheels, and they pull them actually down Fifth Avenue in New York City, you know, and all different cities around the world now. Prabhupada introduced that. But, you know, one time he pulled up in a limousine, you know, or the limousine pulled up, and there was a devotee in a like a chauffeur's outfit with a cap and everything. And he ran around and opened up to open up the door of the limo. And this one guy that was standing there next to his friend, a devotee, overheard him. He said, "Oh, this must be the Grand Poobah," you know. And so he opened up the door, and there was Lord Jagannath inside.
Oh,
You know, the Jagannath deity.
oh man.
So, you know, he was thinking, yeah, this is the guy that owns all the money, that controls all these, you know, cult members, you know. And yeah, it was God himself. So I thought that was kind of a funny story, you know.
Yeah, that's cool.
The Grand Poobah. And it's also like almost as similar as the Prabhupada's name. Prabhupada means, Prabhu means master, and Pada means the person who sits at the feet of the master, you know. So Prabhupada means the master at whose feet everyone sits.
Okay.
Oh, but anyway, I'll read the next verse here, and then Al, you can continue. Yatrime sadasad rupe prati siddhe svasambida avidyayatmani krite iti tad brahmadarshanam. Synonyms: yatra, whenever, lime, in all these, sat asat, gross and subtle, rupe, in the forms of pratiside, on being nullified, svasamvida, by self-realization, avidyaya, by ignorance, atmani, in the self, krite, having been imposed, iti, thus, tat, that is, brahmadarshanam, the process of seeing the absolute. Translation: whenever a person experiences by self-realization that both the gross and subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure self, at that time he sees himself as well as the Lord. Purport, go ahead.
The difference between self-realization and material illusion is to know that the temporary or illusory impositions of the material energy in the shape of gross and subtle bodies are superficial coverings of the self. The coverings take place due to ignorance. Such coverings are never effective in the person of the personality of Godhead. Knowing this convincingly is called liberation, or seeing the absolute. This means that perfect self-realization is made possible by adoption of godly or spiritual life. Self-realization means becoming indifferent to the needs of the gross and subtle bodies and becoming serious about the activities of the self. The impetus for activities is generated from the self, but such activities become illusory due to ignorance to the real position of the self. By ignorance, self-interest is calculated in terms of the gross and subtle bodies, and therefore a whole set of the activities is spoiled life after life, however one meets the self by proper culture, the activities of the self begin. Therefore, a man who is engaged in the activities of the self is called, what's that called?
Jivan Mukta.
Or a liberated person, even in the conditioned existence.
Yeah, I was just, when I go out on Uber, I tell people, I kind of manage this yoga studio, but it's not really kind of the yoga studio you're used to. It's not like a bunch of people twisting themselves up into pretzels and touching their nose or standing on their heads or whatever, It's actually mantra yoga. It's like a call and response drum circle. And I said, have you ever heard of a drum circle? And they say yes or no. And I said, well, you're young. You don't know. Yeah, this is a hippie thing, drum circle. A bunch of hippies sitting around banging on drums, making too much noise and smoking weed. And I say, we do that, but we don't have to smoke weed because we're really having way too much fun. This is more fun you ever had in Pittsburgh. But anyway, right, Alan? We're going to the program tomorrow.
Yeah, I was going to go tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, you have to pick up your books.
Yeah.
Anyway, the thing is that I tell them that this goal of yoga, nobody even knows the goal of yoga. They're just doing it because they have so many different kinds of yoga nowadays. There's like hot yoga, some dude in the 70s made up this hot yoga where he just wanted to make it unique. So he just manufactured this way of making it unique. So he said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some money with this. I'm going to increase the temperature in the room to 105 degrees. And then I'm going to do a set regimen of sitting postures and breathing exercise, and we'll call it hot yoga. Now,
yeah, he also sexually assaulted his the people there too.
Well, they don't even know what they're doing.
Yeah, not at all.
I read this stuff. I've read like 3 continuous months of the yoga literature. And I found in that nothing which says that you have to, he recommends you sit in the hot sun and surround yourself by campfires and sweat your balls off and sweat, so I don't know what people are thinking when they go to this thing. You say, oh yeah, hot yoga, that's cool. Maybe they think, well, I'll do some exercise and I'll sweat and I'll lose weight and maybe I can get a date. But getting a date is not the goal of yoga. Just like it says here, the understanding of yoga means to understand who you are. It's self-realization. I have a whole case of books called The Self-Science of Self-Realization, and that I just brought up from the basement to replace the books that I'm going to give to Al here. That book, it tells you that the self is actually a small spiritual spark, and this small spiritual spark is connected to a super self, which is also in the heart area. And the goal of yoga is to connect with that, or yoke oneself to that super soul.
Is that the Paramatma?
Paramatma means self, and Paramatma means localized aspect of the supreme, like the regional aspect. He's within and between every atom, but he's also within everyone's heart. He accompanies the living entity like 2 birds sitting in a tree. But the small individual bird, he's only aware of what's going on in his own material body, whereas the Paramatma, or the super soul, they call it, is a smarter, stronger bird. And he's so smart, he knows not only what's going on in our own material body, he knows what's going on in every single living entity's body in the entire universe simultaneously.
Okay.
That's a smart effing bird.
Yeah, sure is.
So, the goal of yoga is to find out, to connect and draw some knowledge from that super soul, that cause of all causes, that soul of our souls. And when we are actually connected with him and glean some knowledge from that entity, then we become self-realized. It's like when the sun comes up in the morning, we see ourselves in the mirror, we see our face, we see everybody else in the room, we see the world around us, we see our place in it. And the goal of yoga is to become self-realized. Now, if you're not self-realized, what's the use of doing anything else? It seems like before you get a job or pick a partner in life, you pretty much should probably find out who the hell you are before you do that. Because that will guide your activities. If somebody's just doing animal activities, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, that's not going to, it might be animal life, but it's not human life. Human life is meant for self-realization, to understand the soul. And when you understand the soul, if you don't understand the soul, it just says here, therefore the whole set of activities, it's based on gross and subtle bodies. Therefore, this whole set of activities is spoiled, life after life. In other words, it's a process of samsara. You get born and die, and then you go all over, start over, rinse, wash, rinse, repeat. It's a cycle of birth and death. It's called samsara. And the whole purpose of yoga is to get out of that cycle. And the only way to do that is through chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, because nobody can do yoga in this age. Nobody has the proclivity or the wherewithal or the patience to sit and meditate and do breathing exercises. Those breathing exercises and sitting postures in yoga are simply meant as a mechanical method to concentrate the mind on the soul and the heart and the super soul. But we're too busy watching TikTok videos to, bombard our senses. So
Yeah.
really spoiled. We don't have the patience, that kind of thing anymore. So the recommended process in this age is mantra meditation.
Hey, Scott, I had a question for you.
Sure.
I heard you mention the causer. And I also have a book that you've lent me that deals with Hindu thought and philosophy that compares the Greek philosophers with some of the Hindi teachings.
Right.
Have you ever come across the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas about the unmoved mover,
That's a
the
mental-
uncaused causer?
Yeah. Actually, Al is a Christian by
Okay.
birth. He probably had. I haven't read too much about him. Is there a chapter in there about St. Thomas?
Well, I'm not really into that anymore, but I kind of learned from about St. Thomas Aquinas, and then when it comes to a lot of those philosophers, and even in the Kṛṣṇa and Kṛṣṇa book, it's
You're muted, Al.
hold on.
You're okay now. Whoops.
All right, yeah. Then I was saying, like, what I was saying was I dropped my phone for a minute. That those are kind of mental speculators. Like, they kind of argue about things, and then they'll even put God, but they don't really have a good set of organized way of how to argue about God. They're just basically arguing about a competition on who is right and then who is wrong. And that's kind of why they basically talks on why these dualities even go on. But the thing is like the Vedic is kind of more just one set. And then if people speculate, they kind of can tell it's just you're going off the topic. So that's why I even kind of got away from I got away from a lot of those philosophers and scientists and a lot of people just in general, because a lot of people speculate, and it's a really bad habit. And that's even in that book too.
Go on speculating for hundreds of millions of years, and you'll never reach Krishna's lotus feet.
That's kind of what that book author mentioned too.
Yeah,
well, that's kind of what we're all doing, though. We're all speculating. Nobody knows.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, though. There's two processes of knowledge. There's a descending process, which is called deductive knowledge, and inductive knowledge, the ascending process. Now, if you use your mind and senses and logic and reason, you can only get so far. You can't reach the transcendence with the inductive method. But by the deductive method, from knowledge that is heard from a transcendental source, you receive that knowledge. So it's no longer speculation. The knowledge of the supreme, the transcendence, is not tinged with the human defects. There's 4 defects of a human being. He has a tendency to be an illusion. He has a tendency to make mistakes. He has imperfect senses. And plus he has a cheating propensity. Now, the Supreme Personality of Godhead has none of those those attributes. So therefore, he's totally qualified to impart knowledge. And so therefore we're advised by Kṛṣṇa in the Bhagavad Gita, just try to approach a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. So that's the process of transcendental knowledge. You have to submissively render service to a transcendental self-realized person who has heard the knowledge himself. And then by imbibing that oral reception, the knowledge that's coming through the transcendental sound vibration, our hearts are awakened to that knowledge. The knowledge is already in our hearts. It's part of our soul. But the knowledge is coming from the Supreme Personality. So when it actually is coming from him, it lights up the we say this prayer every morning. Om Gyan Tmanandasya Gnanjana Shalakaya Chakshul Maitamni Natasmai Sridam. It says, I was born in the darkest ignorance, but my spiritual master opened my eyes with a torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. But see, that the thing is, the word that they use there in Sanskrit is called a shalaka. It's actually a surgical instrument meant for removing the cataract in one's eye that they used hundreds of years ago in India. And so you take that and take the cataract out of your eye, and then you can see. So that's what that verse means. The spiritual masters open our eyes with the torch of knowledge, and they just use that analogy of the cataract surgery, which is kind of interesting.
Mhm.
But okay, we only have about a little more than 5 minutes here left, but text 34, Yadi Esho Parata Devi Maya Vaisharadi Mati Sampana Eviti Vidur Mam Himni Sve Mahiyate. Synonyms, Yadi, if, however, Esha, they, Aparata, subsided, Devi Maya, illusory energy, Vaisharadi, full of knowledge, Mati, enlightenment, Sampana, enriched with, Eva, certainly, Iti, thus, Vidu, being cognizant of, Mahimni, in the glory, Sve, of the self, Mahiyate, being situated in. Translation, if the illusory energy subsides and the living entity becomes fully enriched with knowledge by the grace of the Lord, then he becomes at once enlightened with self-realization and thus becomes situated in his own glory. See, it's within our heart. It's not an artificial imposition in your mind or in your heart. It's actually there, and it just has to be awakened. Go ahead, Al.
The purport is because the Lord is the absolute transcendence, all of his forms, names, pastimes, attributes, associates, and energies are identical with them. His transcendental energy acts according to his potency. The same energy acts as his external, internal, and marginal energies, and his omnipotency he can perform anything and everything through the agency of any of the above energies. He can turn the external energy into internal by his will. Therefore, by his grace, the external energy which is employed in illusoring those living beings who want to have it subside by the will of the Lord in the terms of repentance and penance for the conditioned soul. And the very same energy then acts to help the purified living being make progress of the path of self-realization. The example of electrical energy is very appropriate in this condition. The expert electrician can utilize the electrical energy for both heating and cooling by adjustment only. Similarly, the external energy which now bewilders the living being into continuation of birth and death is turned into internal potency by the will of the Lord to lead the living being to eternal life. When a living being is thus graced by the Lord, he is placed in the proper constitutional position to enjoy the eternal spiritual life.
Yeah, it's the same energy, but it's used the external marginal energy. There's three energies. There's the internal energy, that's the living being and the supreme person. And they're kind of like qualitatively the same, but quantitatively different. That's the internal energy. And then there's the marginal potency. That's the living entities. We can choose between to be controlled by the external material energy, which is dull and lifeless, or the material world, the nature doesn't have anything to do with directly the will of Kṛṣṇa, or we can surrender to the supreme energy, and then Kṛṣṇa lifts his the veil of illusion that we're caught in. It's like, I compare it to like being in a club, going to a club, and the velvet rope is the material energy, and there's bouncers at the door, and you can't get in unless you know somebody. And the person that you know is a spiritual master in Kṛṣṇa, and he'll let you in if you know that, and he'll lift up the velvet rope and take away the illusory energy. He'll make it into spiritual energy, and it'll help the living entity to understand. If you want to forget Kṛṣṇa, he can he can make you forget him forever. If you want to remember him, if you take one step toward him, he'll take 100 steps toward you. But it's all based on our desire. We only have a minute left. Anybody have any questions?
I had a question on the only thing is that if we really have that issue of speculating, and like I was mentioning, I really tried to had a problem, because when I read the Bible, there's all these book companies, but they all have different versions of them. But BBT is only one set version.
That's true about everything, though, dude. That's true about every writing you got.
Yeah, but it's actually
the BBT is not like. How's come the BBT? They just kind of want to be on one set thing, but then the others. That's kind of why I'm confused. How with the bona fide, how the Bible is, but they really kind of there's just too many book companies out there that make the Bible. How come
it's not the words? It's actually the person that's saying the words.
That's what it means on your heart. The
it's actually not the words
pretty much
itself.
insignificant.
The words might be different from the New Testament to the Old Testament, but
it's the principle. It's about the Bible is about the principle.
It's the spirit of the thing, not the actual terminology.